I'm going to start with Is Everyone Really Equal? Senso and D'Angelo, an introduction to key concepts of social justice education. Chapter 3 Socialization. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I like this book, but it really is an introduction. It really is an introduction. I like this chapter. It's very introductory. It really explains the concept of socialization um, well, but I'm real bored. Real bored. I don't think this is really a difficult. This concept, like, yeah, humans, we're not objective beings. We're social creatures. We created all the laws and the rules and the means of creating meaning out of the reality that we merely observe through a very filtered lens. It's pretty basic. It's pretty basic to the understanding of human beings in general. Um, Always surprised that people don't understand the most basic things about themselves as a species. I wish this chapter wasn't so utterly necessary, because I've definitely had to explain this to a lot of people in my life that no, we're not objective beings. What you think about something is the product of your interaction with it, filtered through your lifetime of experience and socialization. It's particularly important when we're talking about racism, because we do live in the colorblind era of racism, the dog whistle racism, the common sense racism era. So yeah, so I mean, absolutely, it's a necessary thing to talk about, but I really wish it wasn't, because it's pretty basic. Okay, so next up, let's see, what do I have here? Okay, here. This is a piece by Kwame Anthony Appiah on his book, The Lies That Bind: Identity in Our Age. And I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting in that it does break down identity, and it does force us to think about identity in an important way, because I mean, identity is a key component of the human experience, as well as the idea that we may call tribalism. You know, that very specific process of developing an in-group and an out-group, an us and an other. I appreciate the advice he gives to us for possibly trying to combat some of the more negative aspects of identity and identity politics. The example with children that he gives of let's stop using so much generalizing language around groups of people to children, because we know good and well that generalizing language, if that's a key part of our understanding of a people, then we will continue to develop more generalized language and thought about those people. I appreciate that. Another example he gave of combating toxic identity politics was just spending time around people of the other group in activities where your goal is the same. And one of the examples he gave was soldiers going to war, and saying that, cited a claim that soldiers who go to war spend time together with people from differing backgrounds, working towards a shared goal. They come back and they're less racist. Now, that's, I think, an over summative explanation of war, because I mean, that's because, but also I think it's a very good example of why I disagree with some of what has been said here, in that going to war very specifically is fundamentally posed on an enemy, another other. So yes, when you have a black soldier and a white soldier from America going and fighting brown soldiers from any number of countries in the Middle East, they're absolutely spend time together, form bonds that are very real and very human, and, well, fight American racism but at the same time, it's at the expense of another group, another other, that they are committing atrocities against. So I may be a little utopian in this thought that we don't need to have an other to unite against, but also it's a very complicated thing. When he goes forward and he continues talking about political affiliation as an identity politic that divides people more than any idea that would define one's political identity. My thoughts on that, I think, again, are a little different than what Appia is suggesting that they are. Though I do understand what he's saying in the general, because absolutely both the liberal and conservative parties are the same nation, share the same goals, are fundamentally the same, except for in some very minute attitude differences that do lead to this kind of false dichotomy of them being diametrically opposed. Okay, going forward. Moving on. So the next piece. What is culturally sustaining pedagogy, and why does it matter, by Leman Paris? This is a good foundation. I think a good important note for going forward, creating better educational systems. Okay, this is a continuation of the asset-based understanding of non-dominant cultures in education. As it is a continuation, it does offer loving critiques of the previous iteration, which it cites as Latson-Billings' culturally responsive pedagogy, which is an important part to understanding where we are now, and an important part of understanding why we need culturally sustaining pedagogy instead of just culturally responsive pedagogy. I think it outlines a fundamental shift in the goals of pedagogy. Culturally relevant pedagogy was used very much in a way that still worshipped white, heteronormative, patriarchal values. And in the last few months of being in a classroom in which the students were not white and the teacher was white, watching this white educator trying to use culturally relevant pedagogy as a means of bringing these non-white students into white culture and trying to prepare them for success within a white dominant culture in a culturally responsive way, in trying to find ways to incorporate the culture of young black and brown people into lessons on white society. And I'm sure the one class I am in does not speak for everybody, but I am watching constantly an utter failure to reach these black and brown students on any meaningful level, because fundamentally the goal is opposed to the humanity of black and brown students. So this idea of culturally sustaining pedagogy employs a more pluralistic means of measuring success. And that means we're not using white, heteronormative, patriarchal standards to assess everybody, which is a lofty goal in the very real settings that we are currently operating in here in these United States. Because every system, every institution we are currently operating within is set up to reward white, heteronormative, patriarchal values, understandings, and representations of learning. And it's gonna be hard, be very difficult to, while being within the public education system, to help students succeed in the larger state of America while still maintaining their own humanity. So this piece, strikes me as important, but also strikes me as paralyzing, in that I can't imagine it it playing out in reality. And that's something that's hard for me to admit, because I think I have a good imagination, and I think I dream big, generally. But the stark contrast between ideals and reality is paralyzing. Is disheartening. And as much as I appreciate and love theory and theorists, researchers, and everybody who's trying to play their part in making this system work, I still do not believe it can work. But maybe I could be convinced. I don't know. And moving on once more. Okay, now we're looking at funds of knowledge for teaching, using a qualitative approach to connect homes to classrooms, by Mole, Amanti, Neff, and Gonzalez. I think this concept, the funds of knowledge for teaching, is a really good tool to have. As an educator who wants to be culturally sustaining, it is essential that you understand, at least in part, the culture which your students are coming from. So that does include, like, yes, understanding, at least in some respect, the ethnicity, the languages, the customs and traditions of students that are relevant. But also on the less abstract, the more everyday life, knowing what the home is like, knowing what's going on there. And that's something I really connect to. Like, I grew up, my father was a carpenter. Because and it's always, it's come up in interesting ways, but it's always connections that I've had to make. No one's made those connections for me. It's like, why do I have a good understanding of geometry before I formally studied geometry? Well, it's because I grew up in a household where we built things often, and geometry and measurements, understanding these things were more so assumed than anything else. Yeah, when I was in second grade, my family, we built our house. I was very much a part of that, and that was very much a part of my learning as a second grader, my informal learning, I should say. And from that, and from other projects, from my youth through my adolescence, carpentry is very much just a part of my home culture. It's what I did on the weekends and after school and whatnot. Yeah, but nobody took that into account. I've told teachers, but they didn't know what to think of it, and I didn't know what to think of it. I didn't think of it as an asset beyond carpentry and beyond my possible career in carpentry later in life. Up until I was a teenager, I just kind of assumed I would grow up and become a carpenter. But later, I've really thought I've more recognized carpentry and that part of my home culture as being much more essential to my approach to education in the larger, and just in my theorizing and how one should live their life. But also, and I've met and I can only imagine now, going in as a teacher, my understanding what it means to be the child of a carpenter, I will be able to better serve and better utilize the assets of other children of carpenters, and extend the implications of that asset to, for example, in Table 1, a sample of household funds of knowledge, just all of these possible examples of things, of knowledge that is not necessarily institutionally respected knowledge, that is nonetheless very helpful